Hello and welcome to Empire's Podcast, The Ottomans. I am Frank, your host. If you'd like to reach out, please feel free to shoot me an email at empiresofhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can help the show too by leaving me a 5-star review on Apple Podcast and a follow and rating on Spotify. Sultan Orhan and the Byzantines, Episode 2. When we last left off, the Ottomans were victorious at the Battle of Bafus, and we observed Osman I, his entry onto the world stage. Osman I is often credited with being the founder of the Ottoman dynasty, the House of Osman. According to sources, he was born in 1258 in the small town of Sagut. Sources from the 14th century described him as a tall man with a round face and fair complexion with hazel eyes. His father, Ertugrul, whom we covered in episode 1, took Osman on his raids and hunts from a very young age, and it was during this time that the boy learned to lead men in battle. Osman was probably 23 when his father died in 1281. And he assumed leadership over the families, clans, and warriors his father had gathered around himself. Osman inherited his father's lands, made up of vineyards, towns, forts, and especially the large village of Sagut, and he paid homage to the last of the Mongol rulers in the Middle East, the Khanate. Officially, Osman didn't fully commit to the faith until 1291, when the dream mythos we covered in episode 1 picked up steam. Joining Osman's company were many Sufi mystics, and he eventually married, and his son Orhan would one day become sultan. One particular branch of Muslim Sufi mystics, the Bektashi order, became the dominant credo of the elite Ottoman shock troops, the Janissary Corps, in later years. Dervishes, mystics, and religious scholars of all types from the Islamic world were drawn to Anatolia, and more specifically to the land of Osman. These wandering preachers spread the doctrine that, in theory, all land belonged to God's appointed Muslim ruler. These freelance critics and clerics urged the warriors accompanying Osman that they would be rewarded by heaven for fighting and dying for the Muslim faith. These wandering mystics and scholars helped spread the word that the dynasty of Osman was a little bit more than mere humans and mortals, that God himself just might have his eyes set upon this dynasty. In the year 1323, or was it 1324, sources don't quite agree on this, Osman soon passed from this world. Some sources recorded him as falling from his horse, while others have him dying of a bad case of gout. I tried to pin down the exact circumstances of his death, but kept getting sucked down rabbit hole after rabbit hole of conflicting accounts in different primary sources. No one, though, described Osman as dying in actual combat, leading some credence to the notion he died in an accident. His body was interred by his son Orhan in the city of Bursa in 1326. Osman's tomb is said to have looked down the shoreline towards the Sea of Marmara in the direction of Constantinople, an eternal testimony to the founder of the Ottoman dynasty and his ambitions of empire. Such was Osman's influence upon his descendants that during the girding of a new sultan with a sword once belonged to Osman, the Ottoman version of a coronation would happen, with the following words solemnly said, "May he be as good as Osman." As Osman lay dying, it is said he spoke to his son Orhan, according to Lord Kinross in the Ottoman Centuries, and I quote, "Cultivate justice, and thereby embellish the earth. Rejoice, my departed soul, with a beautiful series of victories. Propagate religion by thy arms. Promote the learned to honor. So the divine law shall be established." End quote. So it was that Osman's lasting legacy for the Ottoman Empire was to have successfully established an independent state in northwestern Anatolia. Within its borders were counted the well-earned and rich towns, cities, and forts, all of which had formerly belonged to the Byzantine Empire. The borders of the Ottoman Beylik was, even as Osman lay dying, being probed outward, and raids were carried deep into neighboring Turkish beyliks and Byzantine lands. Osman left to his son the growing renown of the House of Osman, a fame which would attract men of talent and ambition, seeking a new life as the old order lay dying. Indeed, a poet of time wrote, quote, "We raised a world-subduing empire from a tribe." Now, I think it helpful if we hit the pause button and take a look around us at the world of Anatolia in 1301. The political situation saw the once great Byzantine Empire controlling strips of western Anatolia, with the emperors aligning themselves with any power promising to help defend what remained of their eastern holdings. Thus, the frontier between the Byzantine Empire, that of Ottoman's lands, saw the passage back and forth of constant bands of armed men. Mercenaries, both Christian and Muslim, crisscrossed the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits between Asia and Europe, getting sucked into local politics. To the east of Osman's holdings were a kind of Wild West where no one power dominated. Small lands ruled by Turkish beys, rogue Christian knights, and bands of highwaymen warred with one another to varying degrees. Further east, the vacuum of power left by the waning Khanate acted as almost a force of nature, enabling banditry and lawlessness. A subject often brought up is, what was the status of the Christians living in the Byzantine lands that fell under the Ottomans? In Caroline Finkel's wonderful book, Osman's Dream, she describes the relationship between Christian and Muslim as, quote, predatory confederacy. We must remember that for the majority of Christian and Muslim peoples, most were wholly ignorant of the fundamentals of their own respective religions. The Muslims in the Arabic parts of the Islamic world seem to have fared a little bit better in terms of education, but in the Wild West that was the no man's land between the Byzantines, the Ottoman, and the interior of Anatolia, illiteracy and superstition reigned supreme. This chaotic period saw Christian knights along with Muslim ghazis routinely raiding together and fighting as allies if the chances of procuring slaves or plunder presented itself. Even the Catalan mercenary company of Bafmus infamy aided later Ottoman incursions into Byzantine territory, with the promises of pay and plunder. Thus, in the 14th century, this part of the world saw no, quote, Islamification of the population, but rather the sultans imposed a regime of relative tolerance toward the conquered peoples. When the Ottomans moved into an area of the former Byzantine Empire, the Christian subjects, who were mostly Greek, found their new neighbors not so different from themselves. The once mighty power and prestige of the Byzantine Empire and Orthodox Church had long ago receded. Many former Byzantine subjects, having never been baptized, felt little allegiance to a faraway emperor. Forced conversions to Islam was almost unheard of in those days, as the Greeks found their new rulers generally as ignorant to the tenets of the Muslim faith as they themselves were to of Christianity. When Osman died, he left behind two sons that we know of, Orhan and future Sultan, and his elder brother Ed-Din. The princes were described as opposite in personalities, with the younger Orhan possessing more of the martial vigor of his father. The elder Ed-Din was described as being withdrawn as a child, who played alone. In the group and community-oriented world of the Turks, this caused ed-Din to stand out, and not in a good way. His withdrawn nature didn't endear him to those close with him. A man, the Turk said, hunted within a group, so the wisdom went. Warriors went to war with their comrades. It was the magicians and evil men who consolidated their solitude, not the good birthright of the gentry, and certainly not of the Ottomans. Upon the death of Osman I, ed-Din made no move whatsoever to secure power for himself, despite being the eldest son. Upon Osman's death, ed-Din insisted to anybody who would listen that his younger brother Orhan possessed both the character and blessing of Osman to lead the Ottomans. Working together, ed-Din served his younger brother as chief administrator, put in charge of organizing logistics for the army, developing an accounting system, minting the coinage, and developing laws. As mentioned in episode 1, when I covered the Battle of Bafus, Osman had allowed his troops to raid and plunder the surrounding countryside. And in addition, Osman had snatched up an island that was situated in the Sea of Marmara. This move severed the supply lines between Constantinople and 3 very important cities on the Anatolian side, Bursa, which fell to Orhan in 1326, along with Nicaea and Nicaea. Orhan set his sights on Bursa, which fell after a direct assault. Well, when I say fell, the garrison just surrendered without a fight. These guys were fed up with Constantinople for not providing them with food and relief, and most of these soldiers defending the city actually ended up joining up with Orhan's Ottoman army. Bursa thereafter would become a center of religious and cultural importance within the Ottoman Empire, populated by scholars, clerics, mystics, and the seat of the ulma, or religious establishment in Islam. It was also for years the burial place of future sultans, as its hills would gaze down at the Sea of Marmara towards Constantinople. After the conquest of Bursa, Orhan proclaimed for the first time the title of Sultan for himself, and minted coins in the name of his dynasty, leaving the challenge of welding the newly begotten lands into a cohesive political unit to his very capable brother ed-Din. Orhan was free to lead his armies in battle and to other conquest. First on his list were Nicaea and Nicaea. Both cities were built by expert Greek engineers, skilled in the art of fortification, and Orhan knew that a frontal assault would prove costly. But Orhan had calculated that since these cities were separated from their supply lines, it was only a matter of time before they fell. The Ottomans' good fortune didn't go unnoticed across the Sea of Marmara. The Byzantine Emperor Andronicus and his right-hand guy named John Cantacuzene watched the Ottomans consolidating upon the former Byzantine holdings with growing alarm. After Bursa fell, the emperor and Cantacuzene soon realized that not only were all their options limited, but they were pretty bad. On the one hand, if the emperor raised an army and marched across the Bosporus into Ottoman territory and challenged the Sultan, he risked another defeat like at Bafus in 1301. And supposing he was successful against the Ottomans, what would the emperor actually have gained? This Ottoman Empire was something different from the bands of raiders the Byzantines had contended with. Cantacuzene was fully aware a battlefield victory would bring merely a brief reprieve until these Ottomans rebuilt their army and simply attacked them again. The other option was to simply wait and pray the cities and forts they still held onto managed to hang on a bit longer. This may have been a viable choice before 1326. However, after the fall of Bursa, the supply lines to Constantinople were completely severed. If the emperor didn't act, the remaining cities would surrender, and probably without a fight. And, more importantly, if Nicomedia fell, it would open the way straight to the European side of the Bosporus. In other words, the Byzantine emperor, if he were to sit and do nothing, it was only a matter of time before the Ottomans would be on his doorstep. The sacred city of Constantinople could become cut off from the rest of the Byzantine Empire and become a kind of island city surrounded by an Ottoman sea. There was a third option open: simply pay the Ottomans off in gold and silver. This form of imperial blackmail worked very well for the Byzantines in the past, when they were in a pinch. Whether Latin fiefdoms from Europe, Mongols, Huns, or later Seljuks, the Byzantine emperors had found that treasure could buy time. But, as you can imagine, this came with its own bag of risk, not the very least of which was paying off your enemies might get them to leave your territory temporarily. The gold and treasure in hand, however, had the unintended side effect of ensuring your enemies returned again and again and never went away for good. And Byzantine history is also replete with paid-off enemies that always came back for more. It was, in short, a poor business model on keeping your empire safe. In reviewing historical sources, I was unable to find a definite reason as to why the Emperor Androgonus told to his first option of militarily confronting the Ottomans and thereby attempt a relief of Nicaea and Nicomedia. At any rate, Emperor Andronicus and his second-in-command, Cantacuzene, set out from Constantinople along with a force of some 5,000 men, and what has been described in sources repeatedly as highly armed and disciplined men, and crossed into Bithynia, and they began to seek a confrontation with the Ottomans in the year 1329. Not to spoil the fun for you, but it wouldn't turn out well for the emperor. Instead of having to choose one bad option, he ended up with two very bad options and their attendant results. Crossing the Bosporus with his army, Andronicus decided to head straight for Nicomedia and attempt some type of relief. If the emperor was successful in lifting the Ottoman siege, he might just be able to force Orhan into a treaty. The Ottoman army, meanwhile, was camped on the road to Nicomedia near a place called Pelecanum. On the 10th of June, Orhan ordered 300 of his cavalrymen to ride straight for the Byzantine force and probe them. The troops under the watchful eye of Andronicus managed to push back this Turkish cavalry charge. All accounts of the battle up till this point take great pains to illustrate how well disciplined the Byzantine troops were. Later that day, the two sides joined battle. It is not known exactly how many troops Orhan had under his command, but he is believed to have commanded a force of archers and cavalrymen. The day's battle was inconclusive, however, and as night fell, both sides withdrew to the safety of their camps. This next part of the story I found when researching this episode to be a little bit confusing. Not the first bit of confusion we are sure to encounter when recreating these 14th century battles. But the story goes that during the night, after both sides had withdrawn, that a rumor was started in the Byzantine camp that their emperor had died of wounds sustained earlier. By midnight, the Byzantine soldiers believed their emperor to be dead, and quickly degraded into a fearful mob that attempted to leave the camp in small disorganized groups. The Ottoman cavalry, alerted to the fact the Byzantines were deserting their master, mustered and commenced to slaughter a great majority of them during the night and early into the next day. Only Andronicus and Cantacuzene escaped with a few troops and made it back to Constantinople. The end result of the battle leaves me wondering then, if the emperor was in the camp with his troops, why wasn't it obvious to everyone that Andronicus was very much alive? How did this terrible untruth make it through the ranks of the Byzantine army? If some of the sources are true, and the emperor was lightly wounded, he may have been recovering in his tent, but he could just walk out and say, "Hey guys, I'm actually okay. I'm not dead." However, as I just mentioned, it seems to be a rumor easily dispelled. Another explanation, and this I think might be closer to the mark, is there occurred a mass defection and betrayal of Byzantine troops under Cantacuzene. In researching the battle, I found references to the quote, well-disciplined Byzantine troops over and over. And this was a distinction in my research that I noted because I haven't found anywhere else when the Byzantines would confront the Ottomans, their soldiers as described as well-disciplined. Instead, what we read are descriptions like, quote, the disorganized and demilitarized and demoralized troops of the Byzantine Empire, and the poorly led and prone to defection conscripts sent to fight the Ottomans. In the battles between the Ottoman Empire and the Byzantines, we can't ever gloss over the fact the Ottoman troops were frequently better paid, better treated, better equipped, highly motivated, and superbly led. It was not at all uncommon before a battle for Ottoman troops to infiltrate Byzantine camps, and promising either leniency or reward if the Byzantine soldiers abandoned their cause. It should be noted here as well that when the Ottomans moved like a riptide through the Balkans in the next decades, they were often accompanied by former Byzantine troops turned to the Ottoman cause. After the disaster at Pelecanum, with the emperor having retreated across the Bosporus, the garrison of the city of Nicaea watched as their only hope of relief sailed away. The garrison then surrendered to Orhan. Nicaea, which had the advantage of great storage supplies, would hold out a few years longer, but it too surrendered, and, as it was, cut off from Constantinople. Orhan, never a man to sit idle for very long, quickly moved to add yet more Byzantine territory after Pelecanum. In 1331, the city of Iznik fell, whose citizens, when hearing about Orhan marching on their city, promptly fled on foot. In 1333, Orhan was in the process of besieging yet another city when he was approached by an entourage from Constantinople in the name of their emperor. Andronicus, back in Constantinople, and with refugees flooding into the city after the Ottoman conquest, was in serious trouble. Orhan was left unchecked in his territories, and it was only a matter of time before this self-styled sultan had the sacred city itself surrounded. With his army defeated, the Christian emperor sent out feelers to Orhan's camp seeking terms. The Byzantines were now hoping to pay off the Ottomans. The two sides met in person in late 1333. A fiery background was the dramatic fall of the city of Izmit to the Ottomans. A backdrop the negotiators, while looking on, found shivers going down their backs. I wasn't able to find the exact amount paid to the Sultan, but we can assume it was quite a bit. Things are going to go from bad to very bad, and then, oh my gosh, the world is ending for the Byzantines from this point forward. We will follow the decay and death throes of the Byzantine Empire in later episodes, as they would give way to the Ottoman Empire. Next episode, we will follow the Ottomans into Europe and watch as they further consolidate their holdings and form the beginnings of a vast empire.